welcome back to my channel, and welcome to another wrap up. So now that we're in February, I'm wrapping up January 2022, first month of the year. Exciting. If you want to go and check out my January TBR first, I will put the link up here so you can click on it and go and watch that first and see which 7 books were on my TBR, and then we'll get started. So out of the 7 books on my TBR, I read 5 of those plus a few extra. I did end up reading 12 books in January, so but yeah, only 5 of the 7 on my TBR. There's 2 I didn't quite get to, and I kind of pushed them back into February, so I mentioned them in my February TBR. Out of the 12, I did end up reading my Life in the UK guidebook. So for my citizenship test, I took it yesterday and I passed. Yay! So thank you so much for everyone who wished me luck. I really appreciate the support. I did end up reading this book 3 times. I obviously counted it only as once, but I just think it was worth counting because it is 160 pages of information to learn basically by heart. I could probably tell you this book by heart now. And yeah, I read it 3 times. So yeah, that was part of my January and early February kind of reading, and one of the 3 nonfiction books that I read in January. So I read 3 out of 12, so obviously that means that I read 9 fiction. Generally, it was really dark moods for my January reading, and I do feel a little bit drained by all of the really hard topics that I kind of read about, and these are heart-wrenching, emotional stories. And I did look at my mood on the story graph, and I'll put a little image here, but yeah, you'll see that the most of my moods were emotional, reflective, mysterious, dark, challenging, sad, informative, and adventurous. So generally not a very lighthearted month. I want to get a bit more lightheartedness in there, but I'm still really pleased with everything I read. I think it was a really solid reading month. So without further ado, let's get into like the short reviews. I'll try to keep it short because there's 12 books, although I mentioned my Life in the UK books, so only 11 books to go. All right, let's start with the books that were on my TBR. So the first one was the dreaded Middlemarch by George Eliot, and I finished it. Yay! I'm so happy that I got to it finally. If you've seen my video since October, because I started it in October for Victober, and I've been kind of really slogging through the first half. Like, it took me a lot, and I reread the first like 100-200 pages a few times. There's so much to this book, so it was really difficult, and I was really even wondering if I was going to finish it in January, but I ended up finishing it in the first week of January because the kind of only had the last like 300-400 pages to read, which is less than half. So yeah, from the second half it really became cohesive for me, and I really understood what was going on, and I was really rooting especially for Dorothea. Like, she was my favorite character of this book. But yeah, I think technically it was written in like as 2 different novels, and they were kind of put together as Middlemarch. And I think the tagline I saw online was like a study of provincial life, which you really get an idea because it touches on so many historical and political points. And it's really interesting because obviously right after I finished this, I read about my life in the UK test and all of the British history basically, and it talks about some of the reform where this book starts, and it talks about, you know, people's sometimes unwillingness for change when, you know, the railway came in to be, and law reform and voter reform and all of those things. So very interesting. I feel like I would have gotten more from this after reading my Life in the UK book. So I think that I'd be interested in rereading Middlemarch actually. And someone commented on my classics video, and then the comment seems to have been deleted, so I find it really unfortunate. And if it's you, please post it again because I thought it was a great comment. And they said, I forget the name, but they said that their theory was that classics are maybe better appreciated the second time, like you have to reread them. And I think that that's so true. Having finished this, I feel like if I went back to the beginning, I would understand so much more what's going on, and I could follow the story so much better. So I definitely would want to reread this. This copy, however, will give it away to a charity shop because I hated it. It is just the paper of it, like, just, I didn't like this copy. We'll buy or borrow another copy and hopefully get back into it. It is a big one though, and I do have 22 classics to read this year. So maybe not this year, but we'll see where the year goes. And the last little bit that I did want to mention about Middlemarch is that it's pointing this made me realize, because there's so many different storylines, it made me realize one of my book pet peeves, and it's when authors use characters with names that sound similar or that starts with the same letter. Like, I just don't want that. I don't want that. Just pick different names, you know? Like, it's not that difficult to pick different names. And in this, for example, I wrote them out. There's Ladislaw and Lydgate. So I kept mixing them up, and I kept having to be like, which one is which, you know? And there's Featherstone and Fairbrother, which is not, none of these names are similar, but if you're not used to this, like at the beginning of the book, you're just like, which one is this? Like, I just pick a different letter, pick a different name. Surely it's not that difficult. And that's in my own writing, that's something I realized. I'm just always like, no, I will not have Alice and Allison as two of my characters because that will mess up readers. So yeah, that was one of my book pet peeves. Thank you for listening. Next we have Les Maisons or Hunting Houses by Fanny Britt. This was my French book of the month, and this is a book from Quebec. I started like not too keen, like the story was a bit weird. Like we start with this woman, she's married, she has 2 or 3 children. She works like selling houses, which is what it's called, hunting houses. And she basically, I think she wants to rekindle with a guy that she sort of had a sort of relationship with when she was like really young. Anyway, she kind of thinks about cheating on her husband. Anyway, was not keen. I don't like reading about a main character who wants to cheat, and I don't like reading about adulterers. It's just not something I enjoy. But this story really turned on its head, and I really enjoyed that. And I also really like the flashbacks to her childhood that explain a lot of her current, I guess, thought process and the way that she's become. And the flashbacks reminded me so much of growing up in Montreal. This is a book that's very much set in that world, and if you know that reality, then you'll probably enjoy this. And my other note on this book is that I'm really, really keen to read more by Fanny Britt. She won a prize for her book Faire les Sucres last year, and I just can't wait to read that one. I'll try to get my hands on it when I come home this year. Next is Teine Sāmoa by Dahlia Malaeulu. Hopefully that's pronounced correctly. She is a Samoan writer, and I wanted to read, you know, a book, non-fiction, fiction, whichever, from an author from that part of the world, especially from like the Polynesian Islands. I think it's really difficult to find books by authors from those islands in that region, so I was really happy to find that. And without realizing, it is a book about being basically from Samoa and being a girl, and so I really enjoyed that. It is part non-fiction, part fiction. So the first part is a fictional kind of account of, I think it's 3 or 4 girls who are all of different Samoan backgrounds, and they live in New Zealand, and they all feel very differently toward their identity. And then by the end, it's kind of a very like educational storyline, because by the end they understand each other and their different perspective, and they get to like a beautiful like agreement. And then the second part, it's actually accounts from women, from girls in school, and then women who've become teachers, and I guess members, like active members of their communities, especially those living in New Zealand. So it focuses very much so on Samoan women and bringing from their culture from Samoa, and the difference and how they've not accustomed themselves, but like straddled their living with their heritage and their own identity as Samoan while also living in New Zealand, and how important education is, and to be understood. And I thought that was really beautiful, and I really got an insight into that culture and the path that a lot of these people, I didn't know like there was so many people from Samoa moved to New Zealand, and like all of that, because this is obviously very recent, this book, and I thought that was really beautiful. It's really, really short, so if you're interested in learning about it, I would definitely recommend it. Then I read The Voyage by Virginia Woolf. I actually don't have that much to say about that book. I found it very forgettable is the word that I think I wrote in my note. Yeah, it has some really, really great lines, which I was kind of taking note of, and I love that. And you know, it's Virginia Woolf, how can you not? I believe that this book was written in the kind of the style of a stream of consciousness, and that's really just not something that I enjoyed that much. And it really veered off sometimes in tangent, and suddenly you'd be with a completely different character that has nothing to do with the story that you were on. So very confusing at times. But yeah, maybe worth revisiting at some point, but I want to keep going forward because I'm very excited for the books that come later on. I did want to mention though, I was really surprised because there's a character called Mrs. Dalloway in the book, and then I was googling it, and actually this is apparently the character from the novel Mrs. Dalloway. So that was a really cool kind of tie-in. But yeah, generally I think it was more of like an almost like a look at Edwardian English life. And even though none of it is actually based in England, it's based in South America or the Caribbean. I'm actually a bit unclear. It's very much looking at like the kind of novels people were reading back then, the kind of traditions and way of life, I guess, even that they brought with them when they were away in their colonial, countries. Finally, off my TBR, the last book that I read was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I had kind of started this book when I got it earlier in 2021, and it was really beautiful, but I just wasn't in the mood. And then people voted for it to be one of the books that I finally tackled from my unfinished pile. So I read it in January, and my mom also read it, so we talked about it a little bit. It was nice. It is very short, but to me it reads really slowly, and I will tell you why. Generally, like, my positive thoughts about it were that I thought it was really, really beautifully written, extremely touching. Like, all of the subject that it tackles are very visceral and very powerful, and sometimes a bit too much. But I thought that this was an incredible portrait of like a man, well, from boy to man really, and I generally enjoyed it. But also, to me, okay, let's get into those are good, but to me the reasons why I didn't love it was because to me this very, very much felt like there's two things. First is you can tell that this book was written by a poet because sometimes stuff made no sense. And I'm saying that with the nicest sentiment that, sometimes when you read poems, you don't always get, some lines or what they go together. And this had the same style. Even sometimes, like, some chapters would literally just be lines. So they felt like they were exactly like a poem, except they had a space in between each line. What I do appreciate about this style is that I think that Vuong really takes us out of our comfort zone when it comes to form. And I think that if you're looking for something a bit more experimental, but not like totally out of this world, I think this is a really good one to start with because it is very evocative. So sometimes you'll read a sentence and be like, don't understand what's going on here. But if you go back multiple times, it starts making a bit more sense, or when you tie different themes together. My mom kept, when she finished, she was like, he keeps mentioning a table. And she didn't understand what the table represented. And to me, at some point, he mentioned how when people, when they inherit like a history, a country and all that, it's almost like a house, they inherit it and they live within it. But he only got a table, which I don't fully get, but also you don't have to understand it to get it, like what that means. So I think that that's what the point of the poetry in this did for me. The other bit that I wasn't completely sure with was that I think Vuong wrote this for himself, and you also get the sense with the narrator. So it's a little dog, and he's writing a very long letter to his mother who can't read, and you have a sense as well that that character, he says he's writing for his mother, but he's not really, is he? Because she will never get to this probably. He's doing this for himself, and maybe it's a little bit like almost like a therapy to deal with these hard subjects, these hard memories from childhood, from growing up. But at times it made no sense to me, and I've kind of feel a bit sad about it. I think this may be a book that I would appreciate talking about with someone who's read it as well, to see like maybe there's some stuff I didn't understand that they understood, and that could be a great discussion. Let me know if you're interested in that. But I generally think this is a book that would be worth a reread as well. So yeah, I got a little bit lost with this. Generally a good but very challenging kind of experience, both literary and of the context and themes of this book. Then I read 4 arcs that I got through NetGalley. If you know NetGalley, obviously you can get advanced reading copies. That's what ARC stands for. And usually, yeah, you can read the book ahead of it coming out, and you get it in return for a review, and obviously it has to be like your own thoughts. And I think I've been harsh on a couple of the books on this list, so you know that I wasn't paid for any of this. So let's start with Violeta by Isabel Allende. I've mentioned this one before. I was really keen to read this one. I really enjoy Allende's writing. Obviously, she is from Chile, which is, if you know, the country of my father and my family. Violeta is actually my middle name, so I was like, when I saw that, I was like, oh, she's my namesake. I have to get it and read it. The whole novel is written in the epistolary form, so it is one long letter, a little bit like On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. So Violeta is writing a letter to her grandson, so in the first person. And she is 100 and it's 2020, and it's during the pandemic. And she opens with when she was born during a pandemic in 1920. And then we go through like 100 years of her life. And I thought that that was so beautiful in terms of seeing the span of someone's life, and also the different people that impacted her life and that came and went, you know, from her storyline. That was very human, and I enjoyed that. I really did enjoy reading about some of these events, especially being based in Chile. I think I learned a little bit about my country, like by reading this, you know, about the fact that they had the Spanish influenza pandemic, you know, early on in the day, some of the earthquakes and tsunamis, obviously the dictatorship of 17 years, and the more recent events as well. So I thought that was also well done, and I'm really glad I got a glimpse at that. However, there are two things that I just didn't connect with and I didn't really enjoy. So one, with the epistolary form, while it's really nice, you get one long letter and it's all throughout her life, I felt that it was very distant from the events. So you're reading about her talking about it. So it's not like you're living the moments with her. So it felt very distant from the events, and I didn't really enjoy that as much as, you know, if you're in the midst of the narrative. And the second thing that I wasn't too keen about is that this character is really well off, and obviously Chile is a very unequal society. There are people extremely poor and people extremely rich, and while, you know, that's no fault of her own, the character is born to a rich kind of landowning family. They do lose all their money, but then she still kind of uses the fact that obviously they had a business and all of that to get back into it with her brother, and she makes some money and she becomes quite well off. She basically marries like a Nazi sympathizer, a bunch of German who support the Nazi party during the Second World War. So there's a lot of those things. I was just like, wow. And then she gets into a relationship with a man who basically helps during the dictatorship, and she keeps being very kind of unaware of the dictatorship, and her children and grandchildren keeps being like, you're such an old, like, right-wing, ignorant, like, head in the sand. And she's just like, oh, I feel very judged. And I'm just like, and I know that that's very much like how some people were during the dictatorship, but it's still really frustrating to see that. Because I was like, oh, I want to hear the story of her children, like, because they were in the midst of it, and I wanted to hear that perspective instead. But she does talk about how obviously she came around, but it only happens when she's personally impacted by it. So yeah, so generally the character is questionable, but obviously no character is perfect, but there's some stuff that I didn't really appreciate. Generally, I think it's a nice book, but I don't think that it's my favorite by Allende, and I don't think that that's the one that I would definitely tell people to start with. Then I read The Spanish Daughter by Lorena Hughes. This is a book based in Ecuador, and the author is also from Ecuador. So I was quite keen by that. I should have really gotten the hint from the title that the main character is not South American. She's actually European. And it starts basically straight into the action where she's on a boat heading to Ecuador from Spain, and there's an attempt on her life, and her husband dies instead of her. And so she dresses as her husband to try to find out what happened, because she knows it's related to the fact that her father, who's just passed away, in Ecuador has left her his basically plantation, and it's a cacao plantation in Ecuador. She gets there, realizes that he'd had a whole new family. It's a really interesting concept, and apparently this author does loads of historical fiction that has a little bit of this cozy mystery and like domestic family feuds or whatever. But to me, like I found it really weird that she's just like, oh, my father had another family. He left when she was 2 and she's something like 28 in this book. Like, does she think that he went away for like 25 years and did nothing? I was really confused. And also she's really like adamant that she wants to help conserve his legacy, and she feels very loyal to her father even though he literally left and never went back to Europe. I think her father was French, but he became obsessed with like chocolate. Anyway, I really didn't enjoy it. It felt very colonial in bits, and I just didn't love that perspective. So I had like mixed feelings because I thought it was really interesting. I liked the historical fiction aspect and learning more about Ecuador because I don't think I'd read something from there before. And also I loved like the chocolate stuff and the family feud aspect. And I do like the idea that she kind of is dressed as her husband, so she passes as a man for most of the book. And she kind of first gets used to the customs of man, even though it's a bit heavy-handed on that. Yeah, so there's quite a lot of interesting, but just generally, I was a little bit disappointed, but I really should have just taken my own hint from that, really. The third arc that I read in January was 50 Words for Snow by Nancy Campbell. This is a very short non-fiction book about snow. Every chapter basically introduces you to a word from around the world. So you have 50 different chapters. They're very short, some of them are like less than a page. And it goes through so much, and I love learning about stuff, all of it. So sometimes it's literally different folklores and legends. You also learn about historical events that have to do with snow or how certain things were discovered. And I just love that it was such a wide and diverse portrait of around the world of the different ways and incidents of snow. And as a Canadian, I just love snow, and it just made me really happy. And I think that January was a really good month to read it as well. So that's actually a huge recommend from me because it's a short read and it's also so informative and just a lovely one. The last arc that I read in January was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. I had kind of mixed feelings about this book. I think it'd been really overhyped to me, so I think that's maybe why I was disappointed. And I also kind of read part of it and also listened. I found the audiobook, so I listened to part of it as well. And I didn't love the narrator, but I also really loved the narrative voice of the book. So I had just generally mixed feelings about this book. I don't really know what I think about it, and I think it's a book that I may revisit actually, because actually I don't actually know what happened at the end. And I even had to Google what happened with this character because I had literally no idea. And even loads of people commenting, it was just theories because there's literally some confusing bits in this book. So I don't want to say that now that I've read it I know what's going on, but I feel like I have a better idea. So if I went back to the beginning, maybe it'd be a better experience. But yeah, generally I didn't feel like very connected to this book. And I think it's because of the different timelines. So the first storyline is based in a school for girls, and I believe it's like in the 18th or 1900s. And there's like some weird stuff happening and girls keep dying. And then we keep cutting to modern day kind of Hollywood, and they're making a movie about basically this girl wrote a book about the girls of that school. Anyway, complicated, but so they're kind of in the process of making it, and they kind of want it to be a bit of a horror because of all the kind of mysterious stuff that happened in the school. And you really get a sense of gothic and a sense of these classic novels. And I think that's why I love the narrative voice, and it does keep saying like dear reader and stuff like that, which is really pulling you in. But to me, like the current day timeline didn't feel gothic at all. It keeps having some spooky stuff, but it keeps being like, oh, it's for the movie. And it's like, is it? Like, what's happening? I didn't love that. I did think also, so 3 of the main heroines in the modern day, they're kind of get together. I think they all have a bit of I don't know if it's lesbian only or sapphic. Anyway, there's a very queer vibe and they all get together, but sometimes it felt a bit forced to me. But generally, there's one of the characters I didn't like, but her attraction to other people, I really got that. So like some of parts of her characters were written really well, or I really connected with her, and then some other parts I was just like, what's happening with this character? I have no idea what's going on. So I feel like generally I was confused by this book, and very much so with the past storyline, which is the one that I had to Google, like, who was that? Why were they so creepy? So yeah, I was a bit disappointed with this book, generally. But I think that's one I would love to know, because I saw that it was on some people's best books of 2021, and I was like really hyped for it, and then I was like, why was it? Because I don't get it. But if it was on yours, please let me know why, because I want to know more about what kind of grabbed you and why you thought it was such a worthwhile read. I may revisit it in the future, we'll see. But generally, yeah, I read those 4 arcs. I thought that was really good arc month, and that's why I put myself to read 4 arcs in February, because I thought it's probably feasible, although February is a shorter month by a couple days. But I'm hoping that I can kind of get to that, to try to finish the arcs that I have, and can kind of wrap them up, and also up my little percentage of review. It's always good, isn't it? Finally, the last 2 books that I read for January were actually for the Costa Book Award overall book winner, and I only got my hands on 2 books. So Claire Fuller's Unsettled Ground was the winner in the novel category, so I read this one. You'll be able to hear me talk about this in my Costa Book Award video. I'll link it above so that you can go and hear what I thought, what I liked and didn't like about it. Summary is, I really enjoyed the writing, the atmosphere. I think Claire Fuller did an amazing job. Story-wise, I didn't fully connect to it or to the characters, so for me there was a little bit of a disconnect there. But I generally think that I would recommend this book, and you may have heard about it already on all my videos, but I also read Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. This was my favorite book of January for sure, and I think it is a bold claim to make because we're only like 6 weeks into the year, but I think this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. It is so well done, and I think I will be making a video review for this book alone because I think it deserves it, and I loved it so much. I want to highlight it and tell everyone why I loved it. Alright, so these were the 12 books that I read in January. It was a very good reading month, but yeah, I love tough topics. I love challenging reads. I love historical fiction. So a lot of like heavy, dark narratives, a lot of heavy topics as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to February with some light reads. I started one last night, one winter morning, so I'm kind of delighted to take something that's a bit less challenging to read, but generally very pleased with everything I've tackled and everything that I managed to actually achieve, because some of these books I've been wanting to get to for a while and I've been kind of pushing it, so it was nice to get those done. Please let me know if you've read any of these books. As always, I always want to know what you thought about them, if you agree or disagree with me. And also, if you haven't read them, then, you know, which one are you most intrigued about? I just always love to know what you thought. And as always, thank you so much for listening to all of my rambling reviews. And thanks for making it to the end of this video. And hey, see you back. Bye!